Alastair Campbell was Tony Blair's press secretary and spokesman. He also played a key role in making the case for the war in Iraq, the war that Jacques Chirac refused to join. And he joins us now from London. Thank you very much for being with us on France 24. Great to have you with us. Now, is it true that Chirac once asked Tony Blair how he would look his then newborn son Leo in the eye in 20 years' time if he went ahead with that war in Iraq? Is that true, or is that urban legend?
I can't remember that specifically, but certainly he was very, very passionate and put the case that he was making very strongly against intervention in Iraq. He put it on many occasions in many different ways. And I think that he was somebody who was, as Tony said in that clip there, he looked like a president, he walked like a president, he talked like a president. He had very, very strong views. And there's no doubt that was, I think Tony and he had actually a good relationship, and they were allies on many, many different issues. But on that, there was a gulf. And, neither of them were ever shy in saying what they really, really thought. But it did become quite difficult.
Now, you obviously saw what went on behind the scenes. How much of a blow was it to Tony Blair that Chirac refused to go along with the war?
Well, I think that it was fairly obvious from some time out. I mean, not least from the previous military interventions. I'm getting echo, by the way, so I don't know if somebody can sort that out. I'm hearing myself 3 seconds after I speak.
Apologies. Can we do something about that, please? Perhaps turn off the sound.
Let me just try anyway. So he was somebody who was always, I think, very proud of being French, worried about the Anglo-Saxon dominance, if you like, of diplomacy and international affairs. And I think that was something that I remember our very, very first meeting before Tony Blair had become Prime Minister. A lot of the argument was actually about the role of America in the world, and that was a kind of running theme. But I think, come the decision to topple Saddam, invade Iraq and take out Saddam Hussein, I think it was clear from some time out that Chirac was not going to be part of that.
Well, he argued that Saddam Hussein did not pose a direct threat to France and French security. Do you, looking back, ever wish that Tony Blair had listened to Jacques Chirac?
Well, listen, it wasn't just Jacques Chirac making that case. Lots of people, including people within the UK government, were making that case. And, I think today, the day that Jacques Chirac has passed away, is not necessarily the best time to revisit all the arguments of the past. I think it's time to reflect on what a huge figure he was in your politics in France, but also in politics around the world. And look, I was never somebody who felt that decision was 100% obvious the way that it should go. I think it was always a very, very difficult choice.
It gave him a massive boost. It gave him a massive boost back here in France. It had a serious impact on relations between France and the United States. And it is also seen as one of his most important foreign policy decisions. So I think to not talk about it would be odd. Moving on to something else then.
I'm sorry, can I just say, I'm not saying you shouldn't talk about it. I'm saying that, if you want to relitigate all the arguments back then, I'm not sure that's a terribly useful way of spending our time now.
Not at all. Just wanted to hear your view on what Tony Blair thought about that decision by Jacques Chirac. They had a difficult relationship anyway, did they not? Chirac once reportedly told Blair he was a mal élevé, as they say here in France, which is a grave insult, meaning that someone has been badly brought up. Do you remember that incident at all?
I don't, but I mean, listen, I wouldn't say they had a bad relationship at all. I think that, and it's really interesting. I was just walking over here from across the river. I was just sort of thinking of different memories of Jacques Chirac and incidents that that I witnessed with him and Tony Blair. And often, I mean, certainly in summits, I remember particularly the summit where Tony was in the chair. Tony was the president of the European Union, the rotating presidency. And it was the one to choose the first president of the central bank, which was Wim Duisenberg, and Chirac was very, very opposed. And it became a very, very difficult summit. I think Jacques Chirac displayed extraordinary kind of, quite brute force at times. And so we were getting on the plane to head back to London. And myself and other colleagues sort of saying, you know, God, that Chirac is so difficult. He's so difficult to deal with. And Tony Blair would always say, well, I don't care what anybody says. I really like him and I like the way he operates. And I think they actually I think they did have a mutual respect. I think he found Jacques Chirac incredibly charming, very funny at times. And he was just such a huge character who would fill a room. And sometimes there was sometimes I think there was a sense almost of the absurd. And I think he could laugh at himself. I remember once when France was chairing a summit, and again, I can't remember what the issue was, but it was all kicking off around the table and lots of kind of arguments going on and people talking over each other. And I can remember Chirac just sort of tapping his glass with his pen or a knife or something and just tapping away, and the room fell silent. And he just said, La France propose un café. And that was his way of saying, right, I'm in charge. We're going to have a cup of coffee. We're going to stop shouting at each other. And he just had that. He did, you know, and I know charm is a much overused word in relation to Jacques Chirac, but he really, really, really had it. And so I don't accept that his relationship with Tony Blair was bad. I accept that on Iraq, they had a fundamental, very difficult difference in opinion.
Not bad, but tricky. Not bad, but tricky. Two strong characters, certainly. Anyway,
tricky, yeah.
Chirac, he had something of an ambiguous relationship towards Europe and the EU, didn't he? But he was, you know, pro-EU. I think we can certainly say that. What do you think he would have made of the whole Brexit mess?
I think he would, like I'm sure most European leaders are at the moment, I think he would have shaken his head and think, what on earth has happened to the UK? I think, by the way, I mean, I can remember in the early Chirac, when I was a journalist, I think he was much more sceptical about Europe than he became. And certainly I think that he felt, when we talk about the arguments he had with Tony Blair, I think sometimes he felt that it was Tony, he was kind of testing whether Tony was pro-European or pro-American. And sometimes I think saying that is the choice you now had to make in the world. And look, I think he would be appalled at what's going on in the UK. I think that even though France and the UK have always had, as you say, often a tricky relationship, I think there is an acceptance that the European Union has been strengthened in many ways by the UK being a central player, and will be weakened by us leaving if indeed that happens. And I think also there's always been, I think, a huge interest in our politics, a respect for our politics, a respect for the place you see behind me, our parliament. And I think at the moment, anybody, well, I know this from the last time I was in Paris, talking to different people at different parts of your political system who just look on at what's happening in the UK and frankly think we've become a bit of an international joke.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Alastair Campbell.